What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Armory. Today we're going to have another tutorial on GB Studio for sprites. So sprites are really one of the cornerstones of your game, and today we're going to learn about the requirements and some of the limitations for GB Studio. So first we'll go through some of the textbook information, and then we'll go into GB Studio. So we'll present quickly what gbstudio.dev says. So sprites are the graphics used by the playable or interactive characters in your scenes. Add sprites to your game by including .png files in your project's assets and sprites folder. So you guys remember from the getting started video that root folder that you have for your project contains everything you need to use, your resources, and those will be all PNG files that you're going to use. So sprites are usually 16 by 16 pixels that are laid out. They can be laid out in frames or just one single frame if that's how you're intending to use it. So here's what GB Studio says. A simple sprite has one or more 16 by 16 frames laid out horizontally in an image file. A sprite with a single frame will be 16 by 16, while a sprite with 3 frames will be 48 by 16. So we'll get more into this as we go, so be sure to hang on, but the sprite shown here is a tiny flame. It has 3 different frames, and that is to show the flickering of the flame. So this one is 48 by 16. So that is important, as whichever sprite editing software, sprite creating software you're using, you have to lay these out before you get started. So real briefly, we'll cover the type of sprites. They are static, animated, actor, and animated actor. So static is basically if you need to make a sign, you can make a static sign, one frame, and you can create that in a 16 by 16. Animated would be the one I just showed, something like a flame or something you want to move. So basically if you need anything to move in your game, it needs to be a sprite. So you can also achieve that by tile switching, but to keep it more basic, you can make it a sprite. Next, you have an actor. So you can have a person that you need to talk to, and it will change directions as you talk to them. That would be an example of an actor, but they might not move around the scene. Mainly if you're doing a 2D, you can have an actor in that sense. Maybe they'll turn and look at you, but that's about it. And the last one, which will be your player, will be an animated actor. So that is what I have displayed here with my Roby, the reconnaissance robot. He is facing front, back, and to the right. And each one has 2 kind of frames, so as you're walking down, you can see his little wheels turning, and the same with up and to the right. So we don't have a left-facing animation because you can flip the right-facing animation to create it within the program. Okay, these are the composition of sprites. This is basically your breakdown within GB Studio. You have animation states, which will be set by the type of player you have. So that means say idle right, idle left, or idle up, or moving up. And that will be shown in GB Studio based on the type of character or sprite that you're using. The tile palette will be what you draw in your program. And you can also set 2 other important properties. Those are canvas size and collision bounding box. So canvas size would be increased if you wanted to have an animation like a combat animation where they're swinging a sword or a weapon. And then the collision bounding box will be the area in which the actor will actually collide once you program in your collisions. So if you wanted to make that larger or smaller, you can do it through the program. So the last thing that we have on the right is that all the sprites need to contain only these 4 colors if you're using the default palette. So that's a black, a green, and a very light green, and then the neon green is actually transparent. Alrighty, boys and girls, I'm going to go ahead and show you around GB Studio in the sprite editor and creator. So get to that by going to this menu here, up in the top left, and going to sprites. So in this screen, you're going to see all your sprites listed. These are all the PNGs that you've created in your sprite editor. And to check that, you can go to your root folder here, and it'll bring up your asset folder. And just to show you all, the folder where all these PNGs are is the sprites. So pretty basic. Just make sure you have these mapped to the right place, and ensure that if you have a sprite editing software, it's saved as a PNG. So I use Sprite a lot. Sometimes I forget to convert to PNG. Doesn't show up, and I got to do an extra step. So I'll take you on a quick tour of this area. We've already covered some of these in the presentation portion, but we'll go over them again. So these are all your sprites. Your animations are listed here, and that depends on your animation type, depending on what kind of game you have. So let's look at that really fast. So your choices here depend on what type of game you have or what type of player you're using. So if you're using a platformer and you're the player, you're going to want to use platformer player. And you see what changed was the type of animation. So idle right, moving right, jumping right, and climbing. That would be for a ladder. So you see that change based on what we did. So if you're using it top down and if you're using it top down and you're developing your player, you want to use 4 directions of movement. So that's all pretty basic. Idle right, up, down, moving right, up and down. So as I was talking about before, there's no left because the program can easily flip your sprite, the right sprite, to the left if you want it to. If you don't want it to, you can uncheck that and you see the left shows up. So if you just want a fixed direction, that would be a sign, like a signpost or a bulletin board. You can do that. You can have fixed direction in movement. So if you don't want something to turn, but you do want it to move and you want it to animate, you can do that. You can have 4 directions, which would be like some of your Pokemon trainers. They just kind of stay in place, but they turn in place. You can have your 4 directions. 4 directions of movement, we just covered that one. Platformer player. And one unique one for point and click. If you're using a point and click game and you have a cursor, you have 2 different states, animation states. You have idle and hover. So in a point and click, you might not be obvious what is clickable. So the hover will basically flash up a different animation when you're over a trigger within point and click. So we'll be working in 4 directions of movement today, as we already have that set up with this player. So this is Roby the robot. He's our main player in Roby. And it's really basic. So this is what I drew in Sprite and imported. And as I said, I have 2 of them facing down, 2 of them facing up, 2 of them facing to the right, because I want to show the wheels moving. So here's where you can really check that and set that up. So idle right, 7 facing the right. Same with the other idles. So moving right. So this is your tile set, as we talked about in the other slide. And then these are your frames. So as your person's moving, he'll go through these frames. So you can check that by pressing the play button, not to be confused with this one. So you can press play, and it will show you his animation. And you can see what's going on here. So up here, you can go back and forth frames as well. These buttons. This is called the onion scan. I don't use that too much. And I believe the new version kind of automatically does that when you swap in tiles. Let's see if this stuff will show it to us. I don't use onion scan too much. So these tiles are actually in there, but the onion scan, I believe, makes it transparent so you can see the differences. I don't use that too much. And this is grid. You can manipulate the grid settings using that. So once again, we have moving right. It still looks like there's a double in there, so just we do. So even I messed it up. So you can see moving right, his little tracks are moving. So I want to give a little animation. Same thing with all these, the wheels, kind of the wheels in the front are turning. So the other things we talked about is the canvas size. You can update that here. And like I said, if you need to do a combat motion with a tool or a weapon, you're going to want to make that larger. So you can put your sprite for that weapon into the area, and that will require a bigger canvas. So the last thing you can really do, collision bounding box, you can make it so that the collision is smaller. So if you wanted to, for whatever reason, make it so that the robot's head could pass through collisions, you could set it up this way. So this is the X and Y for it. You see that, move it up and down. The nice thing about the program being is visual, so you don't really have to guess what you're doing here. But you can manipulate the collision bounding box right there. So that's a brief tour of the sprite area within GB Studio.